Greetings, my name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor or student. If they're not one and the same thing, right? But focused on surviving as an instructor and making a broadcast about a point of view. So what you get from me is the MMP point of view, and along with that comes the CT point of view, which means the identification of core new tension in the body, and that it is sensational, or that when you engage in core new tension, it makes alignment sensational. And the more you get to know it and feel the experience that have in your body, the more you realize that this oppositional rotation between axes is a means of generating tension between two axes that, in my point of view, most efficiently distributes the load of the body. So Joe says contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. Definition. Very next paragraph, contrology develops the body uniformly, comma, more of a sentence, but all I care about is that statement for the MMP point of view. Because if you agree that Pilates is a whole body exercise, it's meant to be done as a whole body thing, and that uniform is another way of expressing whole, it's through core new tension that you get to whole body effort, whole body engagement, uniform engagement. You know, in any language, by whatever words, recognizing that the musculature of the human body is an exquisite symphony in expression of control. I don't know how I got off on this so deep so fast. And coming out of that depth, the core here, the core for Michael Miller Pilates, and perhaps nowhere else, but the profession is that there is a literal grip at the hips. You're able to rotate at the hips. Seems like that would be obvious and apparent, but perhaps not wanting to acknowledge that in that rotation there's physics, there's biology implementing the physics that comes from the capacity to rotate around an axis. Right? And that's why going from wherever you're at in tradition and contemporary, making this gondola ride up to a point of view to look around, now I had a good ending to the sentence and I forgot it. Oh, I think I was making the point that introducing CT before MMP as the instructor and as the person offering this information out, I recommend you see that if you're going to have to make a leap to the ideal within Pilates, it might help to make the leap to the point of view that core new tension exists in the body, that the body utilizes core new tension to move through space. Okay. So number one, the only thing on my title, just one title, is curve transitions. Curve transitions. I got into an exploration on Facebook about a definition of back extension, and that interaction helped me focus on sharing with you the clarity that I hope to make in the MMP point of view, is that straight as a shape in the body, as an alignment in the body, MMP, I think of that as extension. Right? Because the moment that it's not, say, in flexion, if the curve of the body is like this, when the body comes out of the curve of flexion, it's always in flexion no matter what the shape of the curve is. Ideally speaking, it's always flexion until it hits that point where it's not flexion anymore. Because by definition, flexion's a curve in a direction. My definition, how I'm thinking, just train of thought. But flexion as a way of bending forward, as opposed to extension and bending back. Right? We're talking about the midline of the body, and the body moving symmetrically in that midline. And when the body is flexed forward in flexion, it creates a shape because it's a curve in a plane the opposite of which is extension. See, I think for you as the instructor, where am I going with this, or why does any of this matter? Well, are we talking about 3 states, 3 positions of the body, or 2? Meaning, is in the plane of the midline, is the body occupying flexion? Yes. Spine stretch. Is the body occupying extension? Yes. Swan. Extension. And in those 2 positions, there's either a curve forward or a curve backward. From where? See? From where it is neither. And I don't know, maybe somebody that's all into a particular way of looking at this has more info on the distinction between those 3 states. I'm just trying to make it clear that within MMP, a straight line happens in extension. That straight is in extension. You say, why is that? Because I don't want to make a distinction between where flexion dies before extension begins, even though you could. And really for reasons that I forget, but an attitude that's built over years. I mean, if you're in flexion and you're coming out of flexion and the curve of your flexion is opening and increasing, what do you call coming out of your flexion? In a way, don't you call that extension? So, more on curve transitions. I mentioned 2 here. One is a curve that's in one state of being or one shape, like flexion, and gets to another state of shape, like extension, is about the human body with, occupying that space and being able to I would say, place their endpoints, especially hips, shoulders, and ears, 3 points on a smooth curve in one direction, as opposed to, or different than, or opposite than, the same 3 points making a smooth curve in the opposite direction of the midline plane. The other curve transition, to not just focus on one, and if you're a listener, what other curve transition am I going to? And what airline am I going to fly to get there? That's playing curiosity and not lecture so much. We're talking about curve transitions, and the curve transition I'm primarily speaking about is the one that happens right here, from the curve that's going this direction to a curve that's going the other direction. There's a place right in there that math and science find interesting or apparent within the physics that we live in. They have a name for it called the inflection point. And so once you actually get control of your core or have a rotational grip at the hip, that's the first center, because it's the biggest and most powerful of one, and it's the one upon which the basis of the other rotational dynamics exist in the body. And it's through a counterbalancing interaction of those rotational capabilities in the body that you distribute load. You use most evenly all of the musculature at your disposal. And so here there is an inflection point in this shape, as well as in your body, the rotational strength in your shoulders and the oppositional rotational strength at the hips connect. You get there via the airline TVA, standing for transverse abdominis. I've made fun of that in the past, or only pointed to it because there's this workshop on the TVA. And I'm pretty fascinated by that, because within MMP, the TVA is what makes the connection between the shoulders and the hips. And so it's critical to the core new tension, the musculature, the muscles of the TVA, because they connect the rib cage to the pelvis, or some such thing. But it's the musculature that accomplishes, or at which this point happens, where one is stretching this way and one is stretching that way, and it's the essence of the eccentric connection inherent in core new tension. The way I look at it. So, in terms of curve transitions, I think of coming out of flexion as the act of extension. I think you're in extension when you hit straight. Just nomenclature for MMP. And then when 3 points on a line form a curve in the opposite direction, that's more extension. I think that's one of the reasons why I think of it that way. And when you look up the word extension, that all by itself sort of indicates along one axis, there's extension, there's lengthening. So in the pursuit of the ideal, or the decompression that Pilates is famous for on the spine, it's in this muscular dynamic of core new tension that it happens most efficiently. my opinion, my point of view, the approach of MMP is to seek the uniform engagement of the body through an awareness of and an instruction towards into the cave of your student's own sensation, so that they can discern for themselves and take more control of themselves. And why did I say themselves? Because within MMP, body, mind, and spirit is looked upon as being, thinking, and observing. All present tense continuous. And that's because the quality of observing only happens in the moment. So these capacities of the human being in their body and their thinking and their observing, my impression is that observing, it happens in now, in the moment. And that's why as the instructor, when you show up as an instructor, remember, Pilates in one word is exercise. Oh, okay, did I tell you about my... And that's all they needed to know they didn't want to know or talk about it anymore. Oh, really? What kind of exercise? And blah, blah. Well, it's corrective exercise. That gives you a good two-word definition of Pilates that encapsulates the corrective loop involved, in which can't happen or can't be without observing being present. Totally concentrated on the purpose of the exercises as you perform them. Joe's words, pretty much. So, know what you know. And so far as core new tension, because in this interaction I had recently, it was all about someone being, to me, it got defensive. And I was looking at what was the definition of what I asked about. And when you see the body aspiring towards ideal geometrical shapes or arrangements, like straight legs and like parallel arms and legs and like round body, like twist throughout. So my parting comment is about this stuff and definitions and words and extension and conceptualizations and shapes in space. That makes me think of Colleen Glenn, shapes in space. And you hold you're in the same space, the same shape, in different ways in space. Something like that. It was good. It is good. So what I would encourage you to keep in mind in your knowing what you know is that not only do you have an explanation of Pilates that works pretty well for an instructor, but the whole explanation is connected sensationally. And that's certainly not the broad realm of the Pilates culture, but something MMP is saying is that to embrace it or to look at it this way, you're limiting it to having to be something about what you're doing in the moment of the doing, because that's the MMP impression of Joe's definition. Right? It's not complicated. It's not rocket science, and yet, and also you can feel it. Now, that may not be obvious or overwhelming in the first interaction, and it may be forever not something that someone is willing to admit they feel or have a connection to that somehow goes beyond their thinking. And all that means for me as a Pilates instructor is that their observing capacity as a human being is what you seek to participate and is a characteristic of the experience. Requirement sounds more appropriate, because you can't say to get the complete coordination of this thing, and this thing, and say, and you can get there by only this thing and this thing. And MMP recognizes, I recognize, that when you talk about thing 3, it can mean almost anything you want it to mean. And so MMP takes it to mean observing. And as such, the 3 things that are requisite in the pursuit of the experience are a human being's being, their thinking, and their observing. And without ever going into an exploration of whatever observing is, other than it is something other than thinking, is all you have to know as an instructor. It's a free ocean, and everyone dives as deep as they wish. So yeah, that ending point, still the ending point is, yes, it helps to have an explanation. Yes, it's too bad that it can't always be mystical, and it will always be, the culture will be what human nature makes of it. And that always happens with any subject. My hope for you as an instructor to survive is that you not only recognize the point of view of the many, but also a point of view only had by a few. And when you appreciate the difference in that, especially the difference in value in that, because of the nature of the difference, meaning it assumes a point of view outside of the one that history offers, it points to a sensation. And why is Pilates sacred to everyone? Pilates is sacred. Well, I came to that casually, but when you think about how important it is to so many people, in so many ways, for so many reasons, at so many levels, there is nothing that stands between you and your student. And by that I mean you are singular as a human being, as the student in front of you is a human being, and you can multiply the other human beings into a group if you wish. But the relationship that the instructor takes on of giving instructions to be followed, within MMP is always Yoda pointing into the cave of your student sensation that they can distinguish and end up taking more control of the one that works better, or developing deeper control of the one that they have. Distinguishing when the grip at the hip is still a grip versus when you're broken in your lower back, meaning you've gone into a bent hose condition. You're in compression. You're too linear and you're not evenly distributed. Anything of value that I've ever accomplished in my life is due to my parents, Charlie and Elaine. And any error and omission and harm and hurt that I've been part of has got to claim sole responsibility for that. Which is tying into, as an instructor, you stand alone in front of your student and you don't instruct by committee. Even if what you know and the authority that you claim comes from a committee, you stand alone in that interaction. So have insurance. Have them sign a waiver. When in doubt, leave it out. Recognize shapes in space. Recognize the pattern of shapes in space. And think how much fun you might have, assuming how much you already know, to find a way of looking at the human body that, to me, as far as I know, unexplored other than by yours truly traveling around pointing it out, right? I wish I had a lifetime just to devote to the research on the science and the measurement of what's considered to be core new tension. And what is that? Well, that's oppositional rotation between axes. Okay, in the body, we're talking, right? Biomechanics. There's some great research in there, just in terms of how you would observe it, and how you would, and therefore how you would measure it. And in some way, I think that would be a measurement between laying supine on the floor at ease, without any muscular engagement, and then somehow measuring the load of the body, or what's different about the body when the body is uniformly engaged in dynamic tension. Obviously, the uniform engagement and dynamic tension, it puts you more in a position to move than being inert, I think. In MMP, there's more than knowing. There's a lot more than knowing, because knowing is the world of thinking. And in MMP, there's an acknowledgement of the human being's capacity in being, thinking, and observing. And the target is coordinating those capacities, for which there is no substitute. Pass it on, because life can't live forever. Read between the lines and see behind the curtain and add two and two. Oh yeah, go back and appreciate perspectives before you add two and two. Direct your thinking. Because if you don't, nobody else will. Always rings through my mind. Geist.